It's called Boyu.
It's called
Boyu?
Boyu? In the Santa Cruz Mountains years ago, I was giving some teachings on Dzogchen, and there was a chukar. A chukar bird is a game bird in India. And there was a nearby farm creating these for food, and the bird escaped and kept on, it was just like this, kept on pecking at the window to get in. It wouldn't leave until finally they left it, and the bird came in and sat in the front row. And I was giving Dzogchen teachings, but only came for one talk. Maybe that was enough, or maybe that was enough. So you see, we're following the avenue of ultimate bodhicitta in the morning and relative bodhicitta in the afternoon. There's a certain balance there. It follows Atisha's approach. In the Lam Rim, you're following the relative bodhicitta first, and you culminate, you end in the ultimate bodhicitta. And that was also Atisha's approach in his Light for the Path to Enlightenment. But in his 7-point mind training, after the preliminaries, after settling the mind, then he goes to ultimate bodhicitta first. It's for people of sharp faculties. Which brings us to this astonishing hypothesis from all of Buddha Dharma, and that is that the nature of reality has been discovered. And it's been rediscovered. The discovery has been replicated many, many times. And that the knowing, the direct knowing of the nature of reality does in fact bring freedom. Does in fact bring us the fulfillment of our innermost desires. Knowing reality is the path to freedom. Or the truth shall make you free. So it is quite an astonishing hypothesis, because over the last 400 years, with this magnificent rise of modern science, we always have the sense that knowing reality is in the future, that we're moving towards, asymptotically perhaps, but one day in the future. But it's like we're regressing towards it in the future, and no notion that maybe someone has discovered it in the past. But there's another thing about the rise of modern science, and that is for all the benefits hedonically, which are tremendous. I'd say it's done nothing for us eudaimonically. Not even positive psychology. Even positive psychology, frankly, is almost entirely hedonic. So, and then one can say, well, then how much has Buddhism done for us in terms of understanding the laws of physics, chemistry, biology, the nature of the brain and functioning and so forth? Oh, pretty much nothing. It's all a matter of what are the questions you're posing. Galileo turned his attention outwards to the objective, physical, quantifiable world and started the wheel of science rolling, so we know a vast amount about the objective, physical, quantifiable world. And it's been such a success over the last 400 years in comparison to the, frankly, to be very blunt, the lack of success of philosophy over the last 400 years in the sense of coming to some kind of a consensual knowledge that has tremendous practical applicability, as science does. Philosophy doesn't. There's no growth of consensual knowledge any more than there was 400 years ago. Just check it out. You find that they all disagree with each other. Unless they slip into groupthink, and then they agree with each other, but for no good reason, except for everybody else says so. And theology also. My father's a theologian. There are many brilliant theologians. But in terms of coming up with consensual knowledge with tremendous applicability, I think it would be hard to state that there's been progress in theology over the last 400 years as there has been in science. So that gives some people, many people, the impression, and quite reasonable impression, false but very reasonable, that the only way you can know reality is using scientific method. Many people believe that now. It's the only way. Ever heard that one before? In Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, we have the only way? We have the only way? Well, of course, now we have a new ersatz religion. It's called scientific materialism. That science is the only way. The only way. And I understand why they've come to that conclusion. If you are looking from a Eurocentric perspective and simply assume that non-Eurocentric perspectives don't exist, or nobody outside of the Mediterranean basin and our progeny have ever discovered anything, then, the Buddhists, the Taoists, the Hindus and so forth, they never came up with anything. Just assume that for starters, that only the Eurocentric came up with anything. Then the notion that science is the only way to study reality, understand reality, in a very myopic, delusional way, seems quite rational. But then what comes out of this, in what I can only characterize as a type of mass self-hypnosis, is that since scientific methods, the third-person methods, looking outwards to the objective, physical, and quantifiable, since they're the only way to know reality, then anything that is not measurable, objectively, physically, quantifiably, doesn't exist. Recite that like a mantra 100,000 times, and you'll come to the conclusion, like the eminent or very distinguished physicist Michio Kaku, that mind doesn't exist. There's no mind-body problem because mind doesn't exist. Recite it another 100,000 times, you come to the conclusion of Michael Graziano at Princeton, a neuroscientist. Consciousness doesn't exist. Published in the Atlanta Monthly, the New York Times, his articles. Recited another 100,000 times, you come to the conclusion of Daniel Dennett that appearances don't exist. And he's the most famous philosopher of mind in the United States. Appearances don't exist, qualia don't exist. He's famous for that. He's famous for saying we are mindless robots made up of mindless robots. And he's written a book amazingly called Breaking the Spell, in which he, in a very ignorant, crude way, dismisses religion without ever waking up to the fact that he is self-hypnotized to the deepest level of denying experience. Recite it another 100,000 times, you come up with John Searle that says introspection doesn't exist. He's the second most famous philosopher of mind in the United States. Mass hypnosis. Cognitive deficit of the highest magnitude. Dogmas stupefy. When people become dogmatic, they stupefy. Whether it's religious dogmatism, philosophical, political dogmatism. But I really don't know of any dogma that stupefies to this extent of scientific materialism, to the point that you say and you hear yourself saying, consciousness doesn't exist, experiences don't exist, introspection doesn't exist, mind doesn't exist, and you actually believe it. That is deep hypnosis, deep pathology. Time to wake up. And smell the roses. So if you'd like to see the fastest refutation, demolishing, devastating refutation that I know of the whole of scientific materialism, you ready for it? Okay, ready? You have to listen very carefully. Okay? Want me to give it again? Okay, the second fastest. I'm serious. The second fastest utter refutation of scientific materialism. That was the first, but if you didn't get it, if you're not a person of sharp faculties, maybe you're a person of medium faculties. And if you're a person of medium faculties, are you ready for the second fastest refutation of scientific materialism? You ready? Pep! That should pretty well do it. If that didn't do it, then you're a gradualist. And then you need to practice Shamatha and Vipashyana. So the real aspiration here is to know what is true, to know what is real, with the hunch that that might actually be helpful it might be instrumental in fulfilling our deepest, innermost aspirations, to be free of suffering irreversibly and to find happiness, the highest happiness, that never lets us down. But if we're to set out on this great and greatest of all adventures, the greatest of all expeditions, then we need to start from a place of certainty. If we're starting from a place of a leap of faith or something nebulous or vague or uncertain, that means all the rest of it will be, the edifice will all be rooted in sand. It will be flaky, it can fall down at any time. So we need to start at a point which is about as undeniable, irrefutable, indefatigable, incontrovertible as possible. Indubitable as possible, as the British would say. Indubitable. So what is indubitable? Well, I think Dujum Lingpa called it. He gave it the name. Let's take, as he makes very brief reference to preliminary practices, and then sets out on the path. He checks to see whether you're sharp, medium, or subtle, or dull. Sharp, medium, or dull. But if you're dull like me, then okay, then you're back to Shamatha Vipashyana. And the Vipassana, the Shamatha approach that he takes, he calls, this is Padmasambhava actually, and the scribe, the mediator, the brilliant, illuminated mediator, is Dujum Lingpa, is in the Tibetan Nangrik Lamdu Kerawa, taking appearances and awareness as the path. And it's also known as Shamatha focused on the mind. It's known as settling the mind, its natural state. It's known as taking the impure mind as the path. But I like this one, taking appearances and awareness as the path. If you'd like to know the nature of reality, if you feel this is important, actually the most important thing to do, in fact it's the very meaning of life, and if we don't pursue it, there's hardly any point in being human at all, then we'll start there. Appearances and awareness. So appearances, what Daniel Dennett refutes, and awareness, what Michael Graziano refutes. Okay. When people are that sound asleep, you probably just should let them sleep. You know, not refute them. There's no point. There's a point where there's just no point, and that's it. I debated once with John Searle. Never do it again. No point. No point. We don't need to. It's not our job. This is the beautiful thing about Buddha Dharma. It's offered when it's requested, but it's not evangelical. We don't run after people. I mean, I'm rambling. But after the Buddha's, you know the story, I'm going to tell it really briefly. But after the Buddha sat under the other tree for 49 days, enjoying his awakening, and then he moved by compassion, he set out on his walk, the long walk, from Bodh Gaya to Saranath, seeking out his 5 companions, right? Knowing that they had little dust on their eyes, they would be of sharp faculties. You recall the first person he encountered was this wandering ascetic. They just kind of bumped into each other. You remember the story? And the fellow asked Buddha, the freshly awakened Buddha, who's your teacher? What's your teaching? And the Buddha said, I'm awake. I'm perfectly awake. I'm free. And the guy said, whatever, dude. And walked away. And that's a very literal modern translation. And his face, it says in the sutra, his face was something like rolling his eyes, whatever, dude. And then he walked on, you know. And the Buddha did not run after him. He eventually came around and became an arhat. But it took him a long way around. Yeah, it's a very interesting story. You can find it. So what is indubitable? Appearances and awareness. What could be more obvious? Appearances. And doesn't happen by itself. There needs to be an awareness of, in order for to be. So why don't we just start there? Appearances, awareness. But also we know that we are prone not only to cognitive deficit of not seeing the blatantly obvious, like in some cases, not seeing appearances, and not aware that you're aware. Unbelievable. Such is the depths of stupor to which scientific materialism plunges the human mind. Unbelievable. But in any case, here we are. We're all prone in varying degrees to cognitive deficit of not seeing that which is in plain sight, but we also are prone to cognitive hyperactivity of so inundating appearances with our own projections, the noise of the mind, the blah, 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 the preconceptions, associations, the labels, the categories, that if we are going to approach this in a truly scientific way, like a good scientist, then if you set up your instrument, whether it's a electron microscope, whether it's a telescope, you want to make sure you're getting a clear signal. Because when you turn it on, if all you're getting is noise generated by your system, by your measuring device, if that's all you're getting, then you're not measuring anything, you're just creating noise, right? So noise to signal ratio is a big topic in science. Noise to signal. Signal is what you're actually measuring. Noise is that which is clouding, obscuring, filtering, distorting the signal. So you want to have a very low noise to signal ratio. Very little noise, very clear signal. If you have a lot of noise and very weak signal, well, it's kind of useless. If you have only noise, you're delusional. If you have no signal, you're asleep. So no signal is ignorance. Massive noise is delusion. Those two are the roots of all suffering. So how can we get a really good low noise to signal ratio when we're using the only instrument known to humans for directly observing the nature of the mind, and that is awareness? Well, of course, you've all recognized, we've been here for 2 weeks now. You've noticed a wee bit of noise in your minds. And it doesn't, oddly enough, it's not voluntary, is it? You can't just say, basta, and have it stop. Because it says, basta to you right back, and then keeps on talking. Enough of this meditation. Let me in. So that's where some training comes in. And it's the very, very first step, and it's one very clearly and very helpfully identified in the whole mindfulness movement. It's very good. This is why one reason why it's so popular, and so beneficial in a number of respects, and has attracted so much scientific attention, which is a good thing. This basic, raw, primal mindfulness be here now. We go back 40, 50 years to Ram Dass. We go to the power of now. We go to, some really best-selling books over time. And that is come right into the presence and be attentive without judgment and just see what's happening. In other words, try to increase your signal-to-noise ratio. Because the noise is all the junk we're projecting on reality. All the judgments, I like, I don't like, and so forth, and all the associations, the preconceptions, the labels, and so forth. And so it's a very good first step. The only problem is when they say the first step is the only step, and you've now arrived at the essence of all of Buddhism, which is more hysterical ridiculosity. It's kind of like saying preschool is the essence of all education. Okay. If you've not been beyond preschool, then that's very understandable. But let's grow up. There's more to come. So we come back here. The session, again, we're going to be silent because what I'd like to really turn the attention to is what is still for most of us most of the day. And most of the day is not informal session, not on the cushion, not in the supine. And so, like filling a bathtub with water or any other pool, the level of the water rises evenly, right? And so, if we would like to see that whatever quality of awareness, whatever refinement, whatever development of relaxation, stillness, and clarity, and so forth arises during the meditative practice, if we'd like to see that it doesn't erode, dissipate, and vanish quickly as soon as we're off the cushion or as soon as we're out of the remaining 6 weeks of our retreat, because we're already a quarter finished. If we'd like to see that whatever takes place here in this retreat that is meaningful and of value doesn't simply become a memory, after the retreat's over, then we need, of course, to place a very, very high emphasis on equally raising, elevating the quality of awareness, the openness of the heart, that's relative bodhicitta track, and the clarity of awareness, the stillness of awareness that we're cultivating in the morning, and see that these two are infiltrating, suffusing, permeating our experience between sessions as much as possible. Otherwise, this is just a brief outing. Your time on the cushion is a brief outing, a little vacation, and then it's over. An 8-week Dharma vacation, and then it's over. So while we are here, for those of us who are here, and of course, everybody's here, wherever you are, there you are. But while here, while listening to the podcast, while attending to them in person, be thinking to make this a very high priority. All very well to listen to Dharma talk, podcast, to have some time meditation. But how does that deliver? What does that deliver to the rest of the life? So the baseline is exactly this. It is this bringing this stillness within the midst of motion, right? I mentioned yesterday afternoon in the talk of bodhicitta, the culmination then is, for your own sake, realization of Dharmakaya, for the sake of all sentient beings, realization of Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya. And what is that? The simultaneity of the primordial stillness, the timeless stillness of Dharmakaya, and the infinite, effortless activity of the Rupakayas, the form bodies. Stillness and motion simultaneously and non-dually, beginning, middle, and end. But we don't need to say in preschool all the time. That is, it's a good place to start. That simple awareness, that momentary awareness, that utter presence in the present moment, the stillness in the midst of motion, the attentiveness to what's arising in the body, the sensory fields, and the mind. The awareness of the stillness of awareness in the midst of these moving, coming and going appearances. But as I said yesterday, it's never too soon to start cultivating bodhicitta, and it's never too soon to start cultivating Vipashyana. Never too soon to cultivate relative or ultimate bodhicitta. Never too soon. And so to start to infuse this awareness throughout the course of the day, in between sessions, with insight. And bear in mind that mindfulness means bearing in mind. It's not just this moment-to-moment awareness. That's a very primitive, initial level of mindfulness. And so often it's touted as the beginning, middle, and end. That's silly. It's marmot. But the classic definition that is proven its value over millennia is that mindfulness is this bearing in mind whatever we're attending to, without distraction, without forgetfulness. So we can have mindfulness that is simply attentive and bearing in mind whatever's occurring in the present moment. That's very useful. But we can also gain an insight that we didn't have before, that we see is important. This could be life transformative. So then we can utilize enriched mindfulness. And that's where we have an insight, and then we infuse our experience with that insight, and it shifts our view of reality. Right? We're not talking about belief system here. Beliefs are cheap, but view is not. And view is that we're actually viewing, experiencing, attending to reality in a different way. And the way we view it becomes imbued with deeper and deeper insight. I think it's enormously important to bear in mind that really Buddha Dharma is eudaimonic science. And all of modern science is hedonic science. And it's wonderful that we have access to both. But overwhelmingly, Buddha Dharma is about eudaimonia. It's about identifying the nature of suffering, both stimulus-driven suffering, but also genuine suffering, the type of restlessness, feeling ill at ease, unhappy, discontent, even when there's nothing negative happening to us. That's one interesting one. What's the source of that? And then what is the source not only of hedonic pleasure, but what's the source of eudaimonic well-being? These are the fundamental questions that drive all of the Buddha Dharma. And it's radically empirical. We don't go off into abstractions, we go just the opposite, right into the immediacy of experience, and we attend closely. So motivation, why are we engaging in this practice? To understand the full bandwidth of suffering and its source, to identify it, to know it, to understand slowly the full bandwidth of well-being, from hedonia all the way up to the heights of eudaimonia, to see the bandwidth, to understand the bandwidth, and then identify its source. Then we know what to release and what to cultivate. And that's the whole path. What to release, what to cultivate. There's nothing more to the path than that. So we have these two questions: what can I do to find the happiness I seek? And the other question is, what can I stop doing that I'm already doing that's preventing me from finding the happiness I'm seeking, that's perpetuating my own suffering? And so through in-between sessions here, we'll get to our formal session very soon now. Time's running out. But especially in-between sessions, as we maintain this stillness of clear, discerning awareness in the midst of the myriad appearances arising throughout the course of the day, we can note a certain tendency that we human beings, all of us, are born with. We not only have connate primordial mind, but we also have connate mental afflictions. Born with them. And one of these is a tendency to grasp onto whatever's happening as being more durable, more static, more unchanging, more reliable, more enduring than in fact is. Our own identity, our own appearance, our bodies, our minds, our relationships, our environment, etc., everything else. The grasping onto that which is impermanent as being permanent. It's not something we learn, it's something that we are born with. And resting in that habit just makes us go from one surprise to another. We're so shocked when things change. You know, how could it happen? Everything was so fine, and then suddenly I was in the relationship, and then suddenly she just left. How's it possible? Like, if you know from the beginning she's going to leave or you're going to leave, and it's already a done deal, then there's just no surprise in it at all. It's already done, you know. And for everything else, whatever is born dies, whatever is quiet is lost. Right? Wherever there's meeting, there's parting. And whatever goes up, goes down. No surprise. I told the end of the story of every story. What are those called? What's it? A spoiler. I just gave the spoiler to samsara. I told you how it turns out. It sucks. All pursuits of hedonia, including the scientific ones, you know. It sucks. It turns out badly. So there we are. So there's one of them. Attend closely with the question. Everything you're experiencing, every object, every appearance, is it changing or is it static? Does it fade away or does it remain? Second one, we want happiness, that's for sure. Of all these appearances that rise to the mind, are any of them veritable sources of happiness? You name it, sensory or mental. Pleasant ones, those are the ones you want to look at. Are any of them truly sources of well-being? If they are, every time you go to them, you'll be happy. And the longer you stay, the happier you'll be. That's a source. Is anything that ever happens to you, any appearance of any kind, are any of them veritable sources of happiness? We think they are. And then we get disappointed. And therefore we call them unsatisfying. Dukkha. Not because they're dukkha, not because they're intrinsically, inherently from their own side dukkha. It's just that we put too many expectations on them. You think your relationship with this person, or having children, or not having children, getting this job, going to this place, acquiring this possession is going to make you happy? Well, just watch. Dukkha is a time bomb that always goes off. It's only a matter of time. And you will be dissatisfied, and you're going to look for another relationship, another job, another place to go, another acquisition, or an extreme makeover. And try to start from scratch. I'm going to now look 20. So look at that one, the issue of dukkha. Because misapprehending that which is not a source of genuine happiness as being so is a source of unending, literally unending, dissatisfaction and dukkha. And the final one you've known, of course. We tend to identify with a lot of stuff. My favorite one of all history is La Salle, the French explorer, on a barge floating down the Mississippi River, looking to his right and say, I own all of that. Wherever this water is flowing from, all of that I own on behalf of France. France, I give it to you. I just think that is just incredibly marvelous. To just look over your right shoulder and say, I own all of that. And anybody who's there. And that Thomas Jefferson took him seriously, and he bought it. He bought it from Napoleon for $11 million. It's basically the whole Pacific Northwest. They bought it for $11 million because La Salle looked at it and said, that's mine. We Europeans, we are really quite a trip. Nobody else did that. Genghis Khan at least had the decency to go conquer them. La Salle just looks at it. He didn't conquer anybody. He sat on his barge and looked to his right. That was what he did. I don't even think he had a gun. I don't even think he killed anybody. He just said, that's mine. I like that. I got some really bad news for the Italians. Yeah, really bad news. I like it here. This is mine. Now I feel at home. Let's meditate. It will be a quiet meditation.